The sun beat down on the Galveston docks like a hammer on an anvil. It was August 1859, and the heat made the air shimmer above the wooden platform where human beings were sold like cattle. Margaret Hayes stood at the edge of the crowd, her parasol doing little to shield her from the oppressive Texas heat. She wasn't supposed to be here. Ladies of her station didn't attend slave auctions. But Margaret had never been good at following the rules society set for women. She was here for a specific purpose. The auctioneer's voice boomed across the square. "Next lot, gentlemen. A fine specimen. Strong back, good teeth, no visible defects." Margaret watched as a man was led onto the platform. He was tall, dignified despite the chains on his wrists. But what struck her most was his eyes. They held an intelligence that made her uncomfortable, a awareness that seemed to see right through the crowd of buyers. "This one comes from a Louisiana plantation," the auctioneer continued. "Goes by the name of Solomon. Owner says he's been trouble, too smart for his own good, if you know what I mean. But he's a hard worker when properly managed." The crowd laughed. The kind of cruel laughter that made Margaret's stomach turn. But she kept watching. Solomon stood perfectly still on that platform, his gaze moving across the faces below him. When his eyes met Margaret's, she saw something that shocked her. Recognition. Not of her specifically, but of what she represented. Someone who didn't belong here either. "We'll start the bidding at $500, the auctioneer announced. Hands went up across the crowd. Cotton plantation owners looking for field hands. A brothel owner from the Strand. A railroad contractor who worked his laborers to death and didn't care. Margaret had come with a specific amount of money. Money she'd taken from her late husband's estate without her stepson's knowledge. It was technically theft, but she didn't care. Some things were more important than property rights. The bidding climbed quickly. 600. 700. 800. Margaret raised her hand. 900 from the lady in the blue dress, the auctioneer said, surprise evident in his voice. Women rarely bid at auctions. "Do I hear 1,000? A large man in a stained suit raised his hand. $1,000. And the lady should go back to planning tea parties. The crowd erupted in laughter again. Margaret's jaw tightened. $1,200. The laughter stopped. That was serious money. More than most field hands sold for. The man in the stained suit glared at her. 1,500. 2,000, Margaret said calmly. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The auctioneer looked confused. "Ma'am, are you sure?" $2,000, Margaret repeated firmly. "And I'll pay in gold." No one bid higher. They couldn't. Margaret had just offered an amount that made no financial sense for a single slave, especially one marked as trouble. "Sold," the auctioneer declared. "To the lady in blue." 20 minutes later, Margaret stood in the auction house office, counting out gold coins while Solomon waited outside, still in chains. The clerk processed the paperwork with barely concealed disgust. "Papers of ownership," he said, shoving documents across the desk. "He's your property now, Mrs. Hayes. Your problem too." Margaret signed the papers without reading them. She knew what they said. That Solomon was chattel, no different than a horse or a plow. The thought made her sick. She walked outside where Solomon stood between two guards. "Remove his chains," she said. The guards looked at each other. "Ma'am, that ain't wise. This one's smart. Smart ones run. Remove them. Now." Reluctantly, they unlocked the shackles. Solomon rubbed his wrists but didn't run. He just stood there, studying Margaret with those intelligent eyes. "Can you read?" Margaret asked quietly. Solomon's expression didn't change, but she saw the answer in his eyes before he spoke. "No, ma'am. Reading's against the law for folks like me. It was the right answer. The safe answer. But the way he said it told Margaret everything she needed to know. He could read. Probably write too. And he was smart enough to hide it. "Come with me," she said. "We have much to discuss." They walked through the streets of Galveston, an odd pair that drew stares and whispers. A wealthy white woman and a black man walking side by side, unchained, as if they were equals. Margaret led him to a small house on the outskirts of town. It was modest, far from her main residence, a place she kept for purposes her stepson knew nothing about. Once inside, she locked the door and turned to face Solomon. "I'm going to ask you questions," she said. "And I need you to answer them honestly. Because I didn't pay $2,000 for a field hand." Solomon regarded her warily. "Then why did you pay it, ma'am?" "Because 3 months ago, I received a letter from a friend in Louisiana. A teacher who works with the Underground Railroad. She told me about a man named Solomon who'd been teaching other slaves to read and write in secret. A man who'd memorized entire books just by hearing them read aloud once. A man who could solve mathematical problems that stumped educated white men." Margaret paused. "She said you were caught, and that you'd be sold down to Texas as punishment. She asked me to find you if I could." Solomon's careful mask slipped for just a moment. "Miss Clara sent you?" "She did. She also sent me this." Margaret pulled a folded paper from her bag. It was covered in complex mathematical equations. "She said if I found you, I should show you this puzzle. That you'd know what it meant." Solomon took the paper with shaking hands. His eyes moved across the equations, and Margaret saw his lips move silently. After a moment, he began to smile. It was the first genuine emotion she'd seen from him. "It's a code," he said softly. "The equations spell out a message. Trust the woman who shows you this. She is a friend. Can you solve it?" Solomon pulled a pencil from Margaret's desk without asking permission and began writing. His hand moved with confidence, filling in numbers and symbols. Within 3 minutes, he decoded the entire message. Margaret stared at him in wonder. "How is this possible? How did you learn all this?" "The plantation where I grew up, the owner's son was tutored at home. I worked in the house, and I'd listen while hiding behind doors. I memorized every lesson. At night, I'd practice writing in the dirt, then smooth it over before morning. When the young master got books, I'd read them in secret, 1 page at a time while cleaning his room." Solomon's voice was quiet but steady. "I taught myself because knowledge was the only thing they couldn't take from me. Or so I thought. What happened? I got careless. Started teaching others. We'd meet in the woods after dark, practice reading using a Bible I'd stolen. Someone saw us. Told the master. He." Solomon's jaw tightened. "He made an example. Sold everyone involved. Separated families. Sent people to places where they'd work themselves to death. I'm sorry. Sorry doesn't bring them back." Solomon looked at her directly. "Why are you really here, Mrs. Hayes? What do you want from me?" Margaret took a deep breath. "I want to help you escape. Get you north to freedom. But first, I need your help with something. Something that requires someone brilliant. Someone no one would ever suspect. I'm listening. There's a lawyer in Galveston named Edmund Hartwell. He's been stealing from estates he's supposed to manage. Widows, orphans, freed slaves who inherit property. He uses legal tricks and forgeries to transfer ownership to himself. I've been trying to expose him for 2 years, but he's too careful. Every time I get close, evidence disappears. And you think I can help how?" Margaret smiled. "Hartwell keeps a slave named Samuel who works in his office. Cleans, serves tea, generally invisible. I thought, what if Samuel had someone to talk to? Another slave who worked nearby. Someone who could observe things. Remember things. Notice patterns that others miss. Solomon understood immediately. You want to use me as a spy. I want to give you a purpose while we plan your escape. And maybe, just maybe, we can bring down a man who's been robbing vulnerable people for years. And if we're caught, then we'll both hang, Margaret said simply. Him for his crimes, us for ours. But I believe some risks are worth taking. Solomon studied the mathematical puzzle again, then looked at Margaret. Miss Clara trusts you. I suppose I'll have to as well. He extended his hand. When do we start? Margaret shook his hand, noting the strength in his grip. Tomorrow. Tonight, you rest. Eat a proper meal. Remember what it feels like to be treated like a human being. I'm not sure I ever knew that feeling, ma'am. Then it's time you learned. That night, Margaret prepared a room for Solomon in the small house. She brought him food, real food, not the scraps slaves were typically fed. She gave him books to read, seeing his face light up like a child on Christmas morning. Take your time, she said. We have a few days before I introduce you to society as my new house servant. Solomon was already absorbed in a volume of Shakespeare, his fingers running reverently over the pages. I've heard Romeo and Juliet performed, but I've never seen the actual words written down. Margaret watched him read, saw the hunger for knowledge in every gesture. This man was extraordinary. In a just world, he'd be teaching at a university, publishing papers, pushing the boundaries of human understanding. Instead, he'd been bought and sold like livestock. The cruelty of it made her furious. But fury could be useful. It could be turned into action. Solomon, she said quietly. When this is over, when we've exposed Hartwell and gotten you north to freedom, what will you do? He looked up from the book. I don't let myself think that far ahead, ma'am. Hope is dangerous for people like me. Hope is all we have, Margaret countered. Without it, men like Hartwell and the slave traders win. They want us to give up, to accept that this is how things are and always will be. And you don't accept that? I don't accept anything that treats human beings as property. My late husband felt the same way. It's why he freed every slave we owned before he died. It's also why his son from his first marriage despises me. She smiled sadly. We're both rebels, Solomon. In different ways, but rebels nonetheless. Solomon returned to his book, but she could see him thinking, processing, considering possibilities he'd long ago stopped allowing himself to imagine. Tomorrow, they would begin the dangerous work of bringing down Edmund Hartwell. But tonight, for the first time in his life, Solomon was free to simply read. And that, Margaret thought, was its own kind of revolution. Margaret's main residence was a grand 3-story house on Galveston's Broadway Avenue, the kind of home that announced wealth and status to everyone who passed. It was also a cage that her stepson, Robert Hayes, used to control her. You did what? Robert's face turned red as he stood in the parlor, the ownership papers for Solomon clutched in his hand. I purchased a house servant, Margaret said calmly, continuing her needlework. Perfectly legal and perfectly reasonable for a woman of my station. You paid $2,000. For a field hand marked as trouble. Robert threw the papers on the table. Have you lost your mind? I paid market rate for an intelligent, skilled servant. Unlike you, Robert, I don't believe in purchasing human beings at bargain prices and working them to death. Robert's jaw clenched. He was 35, 10 years Margaret's junior, and he'd never forgiven his father for marrying a woman younger than his own son. Even worse, his father had left half the estate to Margaret, making her independently wealthy. You're trying to bankrupt the estate, Robert said. Spending recklessly on abolition sentiment and now this. The money came from my portion of the estate, not yours. How I spend it is none of your concern. Margaret set down her needlework and looked him directly in the eye. Unless you'd like to challenge your father's will in court again. I believe Judge Morrison dismissed your last attempt rather decisively. Robert's face darkened further. This isn't over, stepmother. I'm watching you. How terrifying, Margaret said dryly. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have household matters to attend to. After Robert stormed out, Margaret allowed herself a small smile. Let him think she was just a foolish woman wasting money on sentiment. It was safer that way. She found Solomon in the kitchen, where she'd assigned him to work alongside her cook, Bessie. Bessie was a freed woman who'd worked for Margaret for 5 years and could be trusted. How is he settling in? Margaret asked. Bessie smiled. Smart as a whip, this one. Already memorized where everything goes. And polite too. Not like some of the field hands Robert keeps bringing around. Solomon was washing dishes, but Margaret could see he was listening to everything, observing, cataloging. Good. He'd need those skills for what came next. Solomon, when you're finished here, please come to my study. We have business to discuss. Yes, ma'am. In her study, Margaret laid out maps of Galveston and detailed notes about Edmund Hartwell's office. Hartwell works from a building on the Strand, she explained. Ground floor is his law office. Second floor is his private residence. He keeps Samuel, his slave, working downstairs during the day, upstairs in the evening serving dinner and such. Solomon studied the maps with intense focus. Security. He locks the office at night, but Samuel has access for cleaning. The files are kept in a cabinet in Hartwell's private office. Also locked. What kind of lock? I don't know. That's one of the things we need to discover. Solomon nodded slowly. And your plan is for me to become friendly with Samuel, gain access to the office through him? That's the beginning. But I need you to be careful. Samuel might be loyal to Hartwell. Some slaves are, especially if they're treated marginally better than others. I understand manipulation, Mrs. Hayes. I've been subject to it my entire life. Solomon's voice was neutral, but the words carried weight. How do you want me to approach him? Naturally. You're new to Galveston, working for a widow, curious about the city. Strike up conversation when we're both on the Strand for shopping. Let the friendship develop slowly. And when I gain his trust. Then we find out exactly how Hartwell is stealing from his clients. We gather proof. And we destroy him. Solomon looked at her carefully. You really hate this man. I hate what he represents. Men who use the law to exploit the vulnerable. Who hide behind respectability while committing crimes. Margaret's hands tightened on the desk. My husband spent his last years trying to expose corruption in Galveston. It killed him. The stress, the threats, the constant battles. I won't let his work be for nothing. Your husband sounds like a good man. He was the best man I ever knew. Margaret's voice softened. He believed every human being had worth, regardless of the color of their skin. He believed the law should protect everyone, not just the powerful. And he believed that one person, if they were willing to stand up and fight, could change the world. Did he change it? He freed 37 people from slavery before he died. Educated them, helped them find work, gave them land when he could. Robert tried to reverse all of it after his father's death, but I fought him in court and won. She smiled. So yes, he changed the world. At least a small part of it. Solomon was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, I'll help you, Mrs. Hayes. Not just because I have to, but because I want to. If there are more men like Hartwell in this world, stealing from people who already have nothing, then they should be stopped. Thank you, Solomon. But I have one condition. Margaret raised an eyebrow. You're not exactly in a position to make demands. I know. But I'm making one anyway. Solomon's gaze was steady. When this is over, when we've exposed Hartwell, you help me go back south. To Louisiana. There are people I taught to read, people who were sold because of me. I need to know they're all right. I need to help them if I can. That's incredibly dangerous. Going back south when you could be free in the north. I don't care about danger. I care about people who suffered because of my choices. Solomon's voice was firm. That's my condition. Help me find them, or I don't help you. Margaret studied this remarkable man, seeing the steel beneath the surface. He wasn't just intelligent. He was brave. Principled. The kind of person who put others before himself. All right, she said finally. When we're done here, I'll help you find your people. You have my word. Solomon extended his hand. They shook on it. The game had begun. 3 days later, Margaret took Solomon shopping on the Strand. Galveston's main commercial district was bustling with activity. Ships unloaded cargo at the docks while merchants hawked their wares and elegant women browsed expensive shops. And there, sweeping the sidewalk in front of Edmund Hartwell's office, was Samuel. He was a man in his 40s, thin and worn-looking, with gray beginning to show in his hair. He moved with the practiced invisibility of someone who'd learned to never draw attention. Wait here, Margaret said to Solomon. I need to visit the milliner next door. She left Solomon standing outside while she went inside the hat shop. Through the window, she watched as Solomon approached Samuel. The two men spoke briefly. Samuel looked nervous at first, but Solomon had a way of putting people at ease. By the time Margaret emerged from the shop 20 minutes later, they were talking like old acquaintances. Ready? She asked Solomon. Yes, ma'am. He took the packages from her hands and followed her to the carriage. As they drove away, Margaret asked quietly, well? Samuel is terrified of Hartwell. Been with him for 12 years, ever since Hartwell bought him off a farm that was going bankrupt. He knows Hartwell does bad things, but he doesn't know specifics. He stays quiet, keeps his head down, hopes to survive until he's too old to work and Hartwell sells him to someone else. Did he trust you? Not yet. But he will. I told him I'd bring him some tobacco next time we meet. Good tobacco, the kind slaves don't usually get. Small gestures build trust. Margaret nodded approvingly. What else did you learn? Hartwell has been agitated lately. Snapping at Samuel, working late into the night, locking documents in his safe instead of the file cabinet. Something has him worried. Interesting. Margaret's mind raced. Perhaps someone is investigating him. Or perhaps one of his victims is fighting back. Either way, it means he's vulnerable. Scared people make mistakes. They also become dangerous, Margaret warned. We need to be careful. Over the next 2 weeks, a pattern developed. Margaret would find reasons to shop on the Strand. Solomon would spend a few minutes talking to Samuel. The friendship grew slowly, naturally, exactly as they'd planned. Solomon learned that Hartwell kept detailed records of all his transactions. That he had a private ledger, separate from his official books, where he recorded his real business. And that this ledger was kept in a safe behind a painting in his office. Can Samuel open the safe? Margaret asked one evening. No. But he knows the combination. Hartwell makes him memorize it in case of emergency. Margaret's heart raced. Can he remember it well enough to tell you? He already did. 739142. That's remarkable. Samuel is smarter than Hartwell realizes. Most slaves are. We have to be, to survive. Solomon paused. But there's a problem. The safe is in Hartwell's private office. Samuel only goes in there when summoned. We can't just walk in and open it. What if Hartwell wasn't there? He's always there during business hours. And at night, the building is locked tight. Margaret thought for a moment. What if we created a situation where he had to leave? An emergency that required his immediate attention? What kind of emergency? I'm not sure yet. But I'll think of something. She looked at Solomon seriously. Are you comfortable with this? Things are about to become more dangerous. Solomon smiled grimly. Mrs. Hayes, I was sold away from everyone I cared about and brought to a place where I could be worked to death or killed on a whim. Everything is dangerous for people like me. At least this danger has a purpose. You're a remarkable man, Solomon. I'm just a slave who learned to read. Nothing remarkable about that. You're wrong, Margaret said softly. In a better world, you'd be teaching at a university. Publishing books. Changing minds. What you are, what you've made yourself despite every obstacle placed in your path, that's extraordinary. Solomon looked uncomfortable with the praise. The world isn't better, though. It's this. And we work with what we have. Then let's make it better, Margaret said. One corruption exposed at a time. The opportunity came sooner than expected. Margaret learned through her social circle that Hartwell was representing the estate of a recently deceased widow named Mrs. Catherine Porter. Porter had died without immediate family, leaving behind a modest fortune and detailed instructions that her money be used to establish a school for freed slaves. It was exactly the kind of estate Hartwell liked to pillage. Margaret did some research. Mrs. Porter had been a friend of her late husband's, a fellow abolitionist who'd spent years quietly supporting the Underground Railroad. Her will was ironclad, or should have been. But Hartwell was already making moves to contest it, claiming Mrs. Porter was mentally incompetent when she wrote her will. If he succeeded, the money would go to distant relatives that Hartwell conveniently discovered, relatives who would pay him handsomely for his services. This is it, Margaret told Solomon. This is the case that will expose him. How? Because I knew Catherine Porter. I have letters from her, recent letters, proving she was completely competent. If we can get Hartwell's private ledger and show that he's fabricated evidence, we can destroy his case and expose his entire operation. We need to get into that safe. Yes. And I think I know how. Margaret's plan was bold. Perhaps too bold. But she was tired of waiting, tired of watching men like Hartwell operate with impunity. She would create a crisis that forced Hartwell out of his office. And while he was gone, Solomon would break in and photograph every page of that ledger. It's dangerous, she warned Solomon. If you're caught. If I'm caught, I'll be hanged. I know. But if we don't do this, how many more people will Hartwell rob? How many more estates will he steal? Solomon's expression was determined. I'd rather die doing something that matters than live as property without purpose. Then we do this together, Margaret said. Partners. Partners, Solomon agreed. Neither of them realized they were being watched. Robert Hayes stood in the shadows outside Margaret's study window, his face twisted with rage. He'd suspected his stepmother was up to something, and now he had confirmation. She was conspiring with a slave. Planning something illegal. This was the ammunition he needed to finally destroy her. Robert smiled and disappeared into the night. The plan was set for Thursday night. Margaret had arranged for a crisis that would draw Hartwell away from his office. Through a trusted friend, she'd sent word that a wealthy client was dying in Houston and needed to update his will immediately. The client was real, the urgency was fabricated, but Hartwell wouldn't know that until he arrived. It would buy them 2, maybe 3 hours. Enough time to photograph the ledger and escape. Wednesday afternoon, Margaret reviewed the plan with Solomon one final time. Samuel will leave the back door unlocked. You'll enter after midnight when the Strand is quiet. The safe combination is 739142. Photograph every page with this. She handed him a small camera, expensive and modern. Then lock everything back up exactly as you found it. Hartwell can't know we were there. Understood. If anything goes wrong, if you sense danger, you run. Forget the ledger, forget everything, just save yourself. Solomon smiled slightly. You care about me. Of course I care about you. You're a human being, Solomon. And you've become my friend. A white woman and a black slave, friends. Your husband would have appreciated the irony. My husband would have appreciated you, Margaret corrected. Your mind, your courage, your integrity. He would have been proud to call you friend. There was a knock at the study door. Bessie entered, her face pale. Mrs. Hayes, you have a visitor. Mr. Robert. And he brought the sheriff. Margaret's blood ran cold. The sheriff? Yes, ma'am. They're in the parlor. Robert says it's urgent. Margaret exchanged a quick glance with Solomon. This couldn't be a coincidence. Stay here, she told Solomon. Don't come out no matter what you hear. She found Robert in the parlor with Sheriff William Clayton, a heavy-set man who'd always made Margaret uncomfortable. Clayton did favors for powerful men like Robert, and he didn't ask questions. Robert, Margaret said coolly. To what do I owe this unexpected visit? Don't play innocent, stepmother. Robert's voice dripped with venom. I know what you've been planning. Conspiracy with a slave to commit robbery. The sheriff is here to arrest both of you. That's absurd. I have no idea what you're talking about. Don't you? Robert pulled out papers from his coat. I have testimony from a reliable witness who saw you and your slave meeting secretly, discussing plans to rob Edmund Hartwell's office. Margaret's mind raced. Who could have witnessed their meetings? They'd been so careful. Sheriff Clayton, Robert continued. I want you to search this house. You'll find evidence of their conspiracy. Maps, plans, possibly stolen property. Clayton shifted uncomfortably. Mr. Hayes, I can't just search a citizen's home without cause. The cause is conspiracy to commit robbery. And this woman has been harboring abolition sentiment for years. Who knows what other crimes she's been involved in? You have no proof of anything, Margaret said firmly. And unless Sheriff Clayton has a warrant, signed by a judge, you're both trespassing in my home. Actually, Robert smiled cruelly, this is my father's home. And I'm still part owner of this estate. I have every right to be here. Your father left me half this estate precisely to prevent you from doing things like this. We'll see what the courts say when I present evidence that you've been using estate funds to finance criminal activities. The study door opened. Solomon walked out, his head held high. Mrs. Hayes had nothing to do with any plans, he said clearly. If there was a conspiracy, it was mine alone. She's innocent. Solomon, no, Margaret started. Stay silent, boy, Robert snapped. You have no right to speak unless spoken to. I'm not your boy, Solomon said quietly. And I have every right to tell the truth. Mrs. Hayes purchased me legally. She's treated me with kindness and dignity. If I've been planning anything, it's my own escape north. She knew nothing about it. It was a desperate gambit, and Margaret understood what Solomon was doing. He was trying to take all the blame, to protect her. Is that so? Clayton said, studying Solomon carefully. Then why did my witness see you both discussing Edmund Hartwell? Mrs. Hayes mentioned he was a lawyer. I asked questions because I was curious about the law. About whether I had any legal rights as property. Solomon's voice was steady. She told me I didn't. That slaves have no rights under the law. She certainly didn't encourage me to commit crimes. Robert laughed harshly. You expect us to believe that? A slave interested in law. Pull the other one. Why is that hard to believe? Solomon asked. Am I not human? Do I not have a mind that can think, wonder, question? Your property, Robert said flatly. No different than a horse or a wagon. And when property becomes troublesome, it gets put down. Robert. Margaret's voice cracked like a whip. That's enough. Sheriff Clayton, unless you have actual evidence of a crime, I want you both to leave my home immediately. Clayton looked uncertain. Mr. Hayes, I'm not comfortable with this. Without a warrant or concrete evidence. Then get a warrant, Robert said. Judge Morrison will sign one. He owes me favors. Judge Morrison died 3 weeks ago, Margaret said coldly. Had you bothered to attend the funeral, you would know that. The new judge is Samuel Bradford, and he doesn't owe you anything. Robert's face darkened. This isn't over. No, it's not. Because I'm going to file a complaint about your harassment. And I'm going to make sure everyone in Galveston knows that you tried to have your own stepmother arrested on fabricated charges. Margaret stepped closer to Robert. You forget, dear stepson, that I have friends too. Powerful friends. Your father's friends. People who don't appreciate you trying to destroy his widow. Robert and Clayton left, but not before Robert threw one final threat over his shoulder. Watch your back, stepmother. You and your pet slave both. After they were gone, Margaret collapsed into a chair. Are you all right? Solomon asked. No. But we don't have time for me to fall apart. She looked at him seriously. Robert knows something. Someone told him about our plans. We have to figure out who before they tell Hartwell. Could it be Samuel? I don't think so. He has too much to lose. If Hartwell knows we're coming, he'll be waiting for us. Samuel would be implicated too. Then who? Margaret thought hard. The only people who knew were you, me, Bessie, and Samuel. Unless. Her eyes widened. Unless someone overheard us. The walls have ears in houses like this. Servants, gardeners, delivery people. Or Robert's been spying on you directly. Listening at windows, bribing staff. Either way, we're compromised. We need to change the plan. Or we move it up, Solomon said. Do it tonight instead of Thursday. Before Robert can get his warrant. Before Hartwell can be warned. That's incredibly risky. We won't have the crisis to draw Hartwell away. He'll be in his apartment above the office. Then we create a different kind of distraction. Something immediate that requires his attention. Margaret's mind raced through possibilities. Then an idea struck her. What if there was a fire? Not a real one, just smoke and alarm. Enough to evacuate the building. How would we create that? Bessie's son, Thomas. He works at the docks. Knows how to set smoke pots for signaling ships. If we positioned them near Hartwell's building, created enough smoke, someone would raise the alarm. The fire brigade would come. Everyone would evacuate. Including Hartwell. Exactly. And in the confusion, you slip inside through Samuel's unlocked door, get the ledger, and get out. Solomon nodded slowly. It could work. But we need to move fast. If Robert gets his warrant tomorrow, we'll lose our chance. Then we do it tonight. Margaret stood up, her decision made. I'll send word to Bessie and Thomas. You prepare everything you'll need. We meet at the Strand at 11 o'clock. Mrs. Hayes, if this goes wrong. If it goes wrong, we improvise. That's what we've been doing all along, isn't it? Improvising against a system designed to crush us both. Solomon smiled. You're not what I expected when they put me on that auction block. What did you expect? Another master. Another person who saw me as property. Instead I found someone who sees me as human. He paused. Thank you for that. Whatever happens tonight, thank you. Don't thank me yet, Margaret said. Thank me when we're both safe and Hartwell is behind bars. 11 o'clock found them in the shadows near Edmund Hartwell's office. The Strand was quiet, most businesses closed for the night. A few sailors wandered between taverns, but otherwise the street was empty. Thomas had positioned the smoke pots in an alley beside Hartwell's building. Margaret could see Bessie's son in the darkness, waiting for her signal. Samuel had confirmed the back door would be unlocked. He'd also confirmed that Hartwell was home, lights visible in the second-floor windows. "Ready?" Margaret asked Solomon. He nodded, the camera hidden in his coat. "Ready." Margaret signaled to Thomas. Within seconds, thick smoke began pouring from the alley. It looked convincing, like a real fire. Thomas started shouting. "Fire! Fire at Hartwell's building!" People emerged from nearby establishments. Someone ran for the fire brigade. Within minutes, bells were ringing and volunteers were rushing toward the smoke. Hartwell's second-floor window opened. He leaned out, saw the smoke, and immediately started down the stairs. Solomon moved. He slipped through the back door while everyone's attention was on the front of the building. Margaret watched him disappear inside, her heart pounding. The fire brigade arrived with their hand pump wagon. They converged on the alley, finding the smoke pots but no actual fire. Confusion reigned. "False alarm," someone shouted. "Just smoke pots." Hartwell stood in the street, confused and angry. "Who set those? What's going on?" "Probably sailors playing a prank," the fire chief said. "Happens sometimes." But Hartwell wasn't satisfied. Margaret saw him look around suspiciously, his eyes scanning the crowd. Then, to her horror, he started walking back toward his building. He was going back inside. Margaret had to think fast. She stepped out of the shadows and approached Hartwell directly. "Mr. Hartwell. Thank goodness you're safe. I heard there was a fire." Hartwell stared at her. "Mrs. Hayes. What are you doing here at this hour?" "I was having dinner at the restaurant down the street. When I heard the alarm, I came to see if I could help." She smiled warmly. "I'm so relieved it was just a false alarm. These old buildings, you know. They go up like kindling." Hartwell was clearly suspicious but also unwilling to be rude to a woman of Margaret's station. "Yes, well, thank you for your concern. If you'll excuse me. Actually, Mr. Hartwell, I wonder if I might speak with you for a moment. About the Porter estate." His eyes sharpened. "The Porter estate?" "Yes. I was a friend of Catherine Porter's. I understand you're contesting her will. I may have some information that would be useful to your case." It was a risky play, but Margaret was counting on Hartwell's greed. If he thought she had information that could help him steal Porter's estate, he'd want to hear it. "Perhaps we could speak in the morning, Mrs. Hayes. I'm not dressed for business discussions." "Of course. But the information is somewhat time-sensitive. There's another lawyer who's been asking questions about Mrs. Porter's mental state. I thought you'd want to know before he files a competing claim." That got his attention. Hartwell stepped away from his building entrance. "What lawyer?" Margaret began spinning a completely fabricated story about a lawyer from Houston. She kept Hartwell talking, aware that every minute was a minute Solomon needed. Inside the building, Solomon worked quickly. He'd found the safe behind the painting exactly where Samuel said it would be. The combination worked on the first try. The ledger was thick, filled with detailed records of Hartwell's schemes. Solomon photographed page after page, his hands steady despite his racing heart. He'd just finished the last page when he heard voices. Hartwell was coming back. Solomon closed the ledger, locked the safe, repositioned the painting, and looked for an escape. The back door was too far. He'd never make it without being seen. He ducked behind a large filing cabinet just as the front door opened. Hartwell entered, still talking to someone. "Sure, it was just a prank, but I want to check my office anyway. Can't be too careful." Solomon held his breath. Hartwell walked to his private office door. His hand reached for the handle. Then a voice called from outside. "Mr. Hartwell." The sheriff needs to speak with you about the false alarm. Hartwell cursed under his breath. What now? He turned away from the office and went back outside. Solomon didn't wait. He ran for the back door and disappeared into the night. Margaret found him 3 blocks away, both of them breathless and shaking. Did you get it? She asked. Solomon pulled out the camera. Every page. Thank God. Margaret laughed, a slightly hysterical sound. We actually did it. We're not safe yet. If Hartwell checks his safe. He won't. Not tonight. And by the time he realizes anything is wrong, we'll have already destroyed him. They hurried back to Margaret's house, where Bessie and Thomas were waiting. In Margaret's study, they developed the photographs using chemicals Margaret had prepared earlier. Page after page of evidence emerged. Forgeries. Bribes. Falsified documents. A complete record of every estate Hartwell had stolen over the last decade. This is enough to hang him, Solomon said quietly. Legally, I mean. Not literally. It's enough to destroy him, Margaret agreed. Tomorrow, I'll take this to Samuel Bradford, the new judge. He's honest. He'll know what to do with it. And what about me? Solomon asked. Robert knows I'm involved. He'll keep pushing until he finds a way to hurt you through me. Margaret had been thinking about this. Tomorrow night, you leave. I've already arranged passage on a ship heading to Boston. You'll travel as a freed man with proper papers. Samuel Bradford will sign them tonight if I ask him to. You're freeing me. I'm recognizing what was always true. You were never property. You were never mine to own. Margaret pulled out a document she'd already prepared. These are your manumission papers. I'll have them notarized in the morning. By tomorrow night, you'll legally be a free man. Solomon stared at the papers, his hands shaking slightly. I don't know what to say. Say you'll make it north safely. Say you'll use that brilliant mind of yours to change the world. Say you'll remember that one person, willing to stand up and fight, can make a difference. I'll remember, Solomon promised. But Mrs. Hayes, what about your promise? To help me find the people I taught in Louisiana? Margaret smiled. I have contacts in the Underground Railroad all along the coast. I'll send word ahead. When you're ready, when you're safe and established in Boston, we'll find them together. I promise. For the first time since she'd met him, Solomon's eyes filled with tears. Why? Why risk everything for someone like me? Because my husband taught me that the measure of our humanity is how we treat those with less power than ourselves. Because every person deserves freedom and dignity. And because you, Solomon, are extraordinary. The world needs people like you. Solomon looked at the manumission papers, at the photographs of Hartwell's crimes, at this remarkable woman who'd bought him at auction only to set him free. In a better world, he said softly, we would have been colleagues. Friends. Partners in changing unjust laws. We are all of those things, Margaret said. Just in this world, not the better one. And maybe that makes it more meaningful. They spent the rest of the night preparing. By dawn, everything was ready. Edmund Hartwell's reign of corruption was about to end. And Solomon's journey to freedom was about to begin. But neither of them knew that Robert Hayes was still watching, still plotting, still waiting for his chance to destroy them both. The final battle was yet to come. Judge Samuel Bradford's office was in the county courthouse, a sturdy brick building that had survived hurricanes and fires. Margaret arrived at 9 in the morning, carrying the photographs in a locked case. Bradford was a man in his 50s, with sharp eyes and a reputation for honesty that had made him unpopular with Galveston's corrupt elite. He'd been appointed to replace Judge Morrison by the governor himself, specifically to clean up the county's legal system. Mrs. Hayes, Bradford said, gesturing to a chair. Your message said this was urgent. It is, Your Honor. I have evidence of massive fraud committed by Edmund Hartwell. Forgeries, theft from estates, bribery of public officials. Years' worth of crimes, all documented in his own hand. She opened the case and spread the photographs across his desk. Bradford studied them in silence for several minutes. His expression grew darker with each page. "How did you obtain these?" he asked finally. Margaret had prepared for this question. "Through legal means, Your Honor." Mr. Hartwell's own employee provided access to the documents. Everything was photographed, nothing was removed or altered. The originals remain in Mr. Hartwell's possession. It was technically true. Samuel had provided access, even if he didn't know exactly what they'd planned. Bradford looked at her sharply. "You're certain these are authentic?" "I am. And I can provide testimony regarding several of these cases. I knew Catherine Porter personally. I can attest to her mental competence. I also know at least 3 other victims of Mr. Hartwell's schemes who would be willing to testify if they knew it was safe to do so. This is explosive, Mrs. Hayes. If we proceed with this, Hartwell won't go down quietly. He'll fight back with everything he has. He'll try to discredit you, to claim the evidence was fabricated or obtained illegally. I'm prepared for that. Are you? Because men like Hartwell have powerful friends. And you're a woman. The court system doesn't always treat female accusers kindly, even when they're right. Margaret leaned forward. Your Honor, my husband spent the last years of his life fighting corruption in this county. It destroyed his health and ultimately killed him. Before he died, he made me promise to continue his work. I won't break that promise, no matter the cost. Bradford studied her face, then nodded slowly. All right. I'll issue a warrant for Hartwell's arrest this afternoon. We'll seize his records before he can destroy them. And I'll personally oversee the prosecution. There's one more thing, Your Honor. Margaret pulled out Solomon's manumission papers. I need these notarized immediately. I'm freeing a slave I recently purchased. He helped me understand the importance of fighting for justice. I want him to be legally free before anything else happens. Bradford read the papers carefully. This is highly unusual, Mrs. Hayes. I know. But it's important. To me and to him. Very well. Bradford signed and stamped the documents. As of this moment, Solomon is a free man. I'll file these with the county clerk within the hour. Margaret felt relief wash over her. Whatever happened now, Solomon would be free. That was something. Thank you, Your Honor. Don't thank me yet. The hard part is just beginning. By noon, all of Galveston was buzzing with news. Edmund Hartwell had been arrested. Sheriff's deputies were searching his office and residence. Powerful men all over the county were panicking, wondering if their names appeared in Hartwell's ledgers. Margaret was at home when Robert arrived, his face purple with rage. What have you done? He shouted. I exposed a criminal, Margaret said calmly. Something your father would have been proud of. You've made enemies of half the county. Men who will destroy you for this. Then I'm in good company. Your father made the same enemies. Robert stepped closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You think you've won. But I know about your slave. I know he helped you break into Hartwell's office. When this comes out, you'll both be arrested. Solomon is no longer a slave, Margaret said quietly. I freed him this morning. He's leaving Galveston tonight as a free man. And even if he were still enslaved, he committed no crime. He was simply present while legal documents were photographed by someone with lawful access to them. You're lying. You and that slave conspired to. Prove it, Margaret interrupted. You have no evidence. Just your word against mine. And I think we both know whose word the court will believe. Robert's jaw worked furiously. Then he played his final card. I'm contesting father's will. Again. This time with evidence that you manipulated him in his final days, that you used your influence to steal my inheritance. Do whatever you want, Robert. I'm not afraid of you anymore. You should be. Because I'm not just taking you to court. I'm going to make sure everyone knows what kind of woman you really are. A traitor to your race. A criminal. A woman who consorts with slaves and criminals. And I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of man you are, Margaret said coldly. A son who resented his father's goodness. Who tried to re-enslave people his father had freed. Who allied himself with corrupt lawyers and thieves. See which of us society judges more harshly. Robert left without another word, but Margaret knew this wasn't over. Robert would keep fighting, keep trying to destroy her. But she'd dealt with worse enemies than her stepson. She went to find Solomon. They had a few hours before his ship departed. Time to say goodbye. She found him in a small house on the outskirts of town, packing the few belongings she'd given him. He looked up when she entered. It's done, she said. Hartwell is arrested. You're legally free. And there's a ship waiting to take you to Boston. Solomon nodded slowly. And you? What happens to you now? I continue the fight. There are other Edmund Hartwells out there. Other people who need help. She smiled. It's what I do. You'll be in danger. Robert won't give up. Neither will I. Solomon picked up a book from the table, the volume of Shakespeare she'd given him weeks ago. Mrs. Hayes, I've been thinking. About what comes next. About what I can do with this freedom you've given me. What will you do? I'm going to become a teacher. A real teacher, legal and recognized. I'm going to educate freed slaves, help them understand their rights, teach them to read and write so they can fight for themselves. His eyes were bright with purpose. And someday, when slavery is finally abolished, I'm going to make sure the people who suffered under it are ready to seize their freedom. That's a beautiful dream. It's more than a dream. It's a promise. The same kind of promise you made to your husband. Margaret felt tears threatening. You're going to change the world, Solomon. We both are. Just in different ways. He extended his hand. Partners, remember. She shook his hand, then impulsively pulled him into an embrace. Be safe. Be brilliant. Be everything you were meant to be. I will. And Mrs. Hayes. When slavery ends, when we finally build that better world we talked about, I'm coming back to Galveston. I'm going to find every person who was sold because of me, and I'm going to help them rebuild their lives. That's my promise. Then I'll be here to help you keep it. That night, Margaret stood on the docks watching Solomon's ship disappear into the darkness. Beside her stood Bessie, who'd come to see him off. You did a good thing, Bessie said quietly. That man is going to change the world. I hope so. You know they're going to come after you. Robert, Hartwell's friends, all of them. They won't forgive this. I know. And you're going to keep fighting anyway? I am. Bessie smiled. Good. Because you're going to need help. And I've got friends. Other freed people, abolitionists, good folks who believe in what you're doing. You're not alone in this, Mrs. Hayes. Margaret felt something warm bloom in her chest. Hope, maybe. Or just the knowledge that she'd found her purpose. Thank you, Bessie. Don't thank me yet. Thank me when we've torn down this whole rotten system. They walked back through the quiet streets of Galveston, two women who should have been enemies according to society's rules but who'd become allies in something greater. Behind them, the ship carrying Solomon toward freedom sailed into the night. And in Galveston, the reckoning had only just begun. 3 months later, Edmund Hartwell's trial began. The courthouse was packed with spectators. Powerful men sat in the gallery, watching nervously to see if their names would be mentioned. Reporters from newspapers as far away as New Orleans had come to cover the trial. And in the front row, Margaret Hayes sat tall and dignified, ready to testify. The prosecution's case was devastating. They had Hartwell's own ledgers, authenticated by handwriting experts. They had testimony from multiple victims whose estates he'd stolen. They had financial records showing bribes paid to officials. But the defense fought back hard. Hartwell's lawyer was a slick operator named Vincent Price, and he went after Margaret with everything he had. "Mrs. Hayes," Price said during cross-examination, "isn't it true that you conspired with a slave to break into my client's office and steal private documents?" "No," Margaret said calmly. "That is not true. But you did purchase a slave named Solomon for the unusual sum of $2,000, did you not?" "I did. And this slave had access to your household, your private conversations, your business dealings." "He worked in my household, yes. And shortly after purchasing this slave, you suddenly produced evidence against Mr. Hartwell, a respected lawyer and citizen of Galveston. Quite a coincidence, wouldn't you say?" "There's no coincidence. I investigated Mr. Hartwell because I suspected he was defrauding estates. What I discovered confirmed my suspicions." Price smiled like a shark. "And where is this slave now, Mrs. Hayes?" "Solomon is a free man. I freed him 3 months ago. He's currently in Boston, working as a teacher." Gasps erupted in the courtroom. Freeing a slave was unusual enough, but sending him north to become a teacher was practically revolutionary. "So your co-conspirator has fled the jurisdiction," Price said triumphantly. "How convenient. He can't be questioned about his role in this alleged conspiracy." "There was no conspiracy," Margaret said firmly. "And Solomon's testimony isn't needed. The evidence speaks for itself." Price attacked her credibility for another hour, insinuating that she was mentally unstable, that she was motivated by anger at her stepson, that she'd fabricated the entire case out of abolition fanaticism. But Margaret held firm. She'd faced worse than Vincent Price. Judge Bradford finally intervened. "Mr. Price, unless you have actual evidence to impeach this witness's testimony, I suggest you move on." "No further questions, Your Honor." The trial lasted 2 weeks. The prosecution methodically built their case, showing exactly how Hartwell had stolen from estate after estate. They produced victims who testified tearfully about losing inheritances meant for schools, orphanages, freed slaves. Catherine Porter's letters were particularly damning. Margaret had saved every one, and they clearly showed a mentally sharp woman with specific plans for her estate. Hartwell's claims that she was incompetent fell apart under scrutiny. On the 15th day, the jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Guilty on all counts. Hartwell's face went white as the verdict was read. Around the courtroom, his co-conspirators squirmed, knowing they would be next. Judge Bradford sentenced him to 20 years in prison and ordered him to make full restitution to all his victims. "Mr. Hartwell, you betrayed the trust placed in you as an officer of the court. You stole from widows, orphans, and freed slaves, the most vulnerable members of our society. Your crimes are particularly heinous because you used the law itself as a weapon against those who could least defend themselves." As Hartwell was led away in chains, his eyes found Margaret's. The hatred there was palpable. But Margaret felt only relief. One monster down. Many more to go. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed Margaret. "Mrs. Hayes, how do you respond to accusations that you conspired with a slave to obtain evidence illegally?" "Solomon was never a slave in any moral sense," Margaret said clearly. "He was a free man from the moment he was born, regardless of what the law claimed. I simply recognized that truth and formalized it legally." "Are you an abolitionist?" "I'm someone who believes all human beings deserve freedom and dignity. If that makes me an abolitionist, so be it. What message do you have for other women who might want to follow your example?" Margaret thought carefully before answering. "I would say that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what's right despite being afraid. My husband taught me that one person, willing to stand up and fight, can change the world. I believe that's true for anyone, man or woman, who's willing to try. The interview might have continued, but Bessie appeared at Margaret's elbow. We need to go, ma'am. There's trouble at the house. They hurried to Margaret's carriage. As soon as they were inside, Bessie explained. Robert's been to the house. He's filed new papers contesting the will. Claims you manipulated his father through Solomon, that the whole thing was a long con to steal the Hayes fortune. Margaret closed her eyes. Of course Robert hadn't given up. He never would. What are the papers based on? He's claiming your purchase of Solomon proves premeditation. That you brought Solomon into the household specifically to help you control his father in his final days. That's insane. I didn't even meet Solomon until 3 months ago. My husband died 2 years before that. I know. But Robert's found a judge willing to hear the case. Judge Morrison's nephew, Theodore Morrison. He owes Robert money, apparently. Of course he does. Margaret felt exhaustion washing over her. When is the hearing? Next week. Margaret looked out the carriage window at Galveston passing by. This beautiful, corrupt city where her husband had fought so hard for justice. Where she'd found Solomon and helped him find freedom. Where powerful men still controlled everything through money and influence. She could run. Take her portion of the estate and leave Galveston forever. Start over somewhere else where Robert couldn't reach her. But that would mean abandoning everything her husband had built. All the people he'd freed, all the changes he'd fought for, all the dreams he'd had for a better world. We fight, Margaret said quietly. We keep fighting until there's nothing left to fight with. Bessie squeezed her hand. Then we fight together. The hearing was a circus. Robert's lawyer presented a case built entirely on innuendo and circumstantial evidence. They couldn't prove Margaret had done anything illegal, so they tried to paint her as a manipulator, an opportunist, a woman who'd married an old man for his money and then conspired to keep it from his rightful heir. Mrs. Hayes purchased a slave for $2,000, the lawyer argued. An obscene amount. Why? Because this particular slave was exceptionally intelligent. She planned to use him to help her maintain control over the estate, to forge documents, to manipulate financial records. That's absurd, Margaret's lawyer objected. Mrs. Hayes freed Solomon immediately after the Hartwell trial. If she'd planned to use him for criminal purposes, why would she free him? To get him out of the jurisdiction before he could testify against her. Judge Theodore Morrison, a weak-chinned man who clearly owed Robert more than just money, listened to both sides with barely concealed bias. Mrs. Hayes, he said finally, can you produce this Solomon to testify on your behalf? He's in Boston, Your Honor. But I have his sworn affidavit. An affidavit isn't testimony. I want the man here in person. That could take weeks, Your Honor. He would have to travel from Boston. Then we'll adjourn until he arrives. Mr. Hayes has raised serious questions about your character and your relationship with this slave. I believe the court deserves to hear directly from the man himself. Margaret's lawyer objected, but Morrison overruled him. The hearing was adjourned for 6 weeks. As they left the courthouse, Margaret's lawyer was fuming. Morrison is bought and paid for. Even if we bring Solomon back, he'll rule against you anyway. Then we need to make sure he can't, Margaret said. What do you mean? I mean it's time to fight fire with fire. That night, Margaret wrote a letter to Solomon, explaining the situation. She also wrote letters to every newspaper editor in Texas, to prominent abolitionists in the North, to her husband's old friends and colleagues. She told them everything. About Hartwell's crimes, about Robert's attempts to re-enslave people his father had freed, about the corruption that still plagued Galveston. And she told them about Solomon. About his brilliance, his courage, his humanity. About how he'd risked everything to help expose Hartwell. The letters created a firestorm. Within 2 weeks, newspapers across the country were running stories about the brilliant slave of Galveston. About a man who taught himself mathematics and literature, who'd become a teacher in Boston, who'd helped bring down a corrupt lawyer. Abolitionists seized on Solomon's story as proof that slavery was not only immoral but absurd. How could society claim black people were inferior when Solomon existed? Pro-slavery advocates tried to discredit the story, claiming it was abolitionist propaganda. But too many people had witnessed Solomon's intelligence firsthand. The auctioneer who'd sold him. The guards who'd watched him. Samuel, who confirmed everything Solomon had done. The controversy grew so intense that it reached Washington. Senators debated Solomon's case on the floor of Congress. Was he an anomaly or proof that all slaves had untapped potential? And then, 4 weeks after the hearing was adjourned, Solomon himself appeared in Galveston. He'd traveled from Boston on his own, using money he'd earned as a teacher. He walked into Judge Morrison's courthouse as a free man, carrying himself with quiet dignity. "I'm here to testify," he told Margaret. "To tell the truth about everything." The resumed hearing was packed. Word had spread that the famous Solomon would be testifying, and people came from across Texas to see him. Robert looked nervous. His lawyer looked even more so. They'd expected their accusations to go unchallenged, but now they faced a man who could speak for himself. Solomon took the stand. "State your name," the judge said. "Solomon Hayes, Your Honor." Gasps erupted. Solomon had taken Margaret's last name. "You're claiming to be a member of the Hayes family?" Judge Morrison asked incredulously. "I'm claiming the name of the woman who gave me freedom and dignity," Solomon said calmly. "She's done more for me than my blood relatives ever did. In every way that matters, she's family." Robert jumped to his feet. "Your Honor, this is outrageous." "Sit down, Mr. Hayes," Morrison said. But he looked uncertain now. The political winds were shifting, and he knew it. Solomon testified for 3 hours. He described meeting Margaret, the risks she'd taken to expose Hartwell, the kindness she'd shown him. He explained that he'd never met Margaret's late husband, that he couldn't possibly have been involved in any conspiracy to steal the estate. "Mrs. Hayes bought me at auction because she wanted to free me," Solomon said. "She saw a human being where others saw property. She risked her reputation, her safety, and her fortune to do what was right. That's not the behavior of a manipulator. That's the behavior of a hero." Robert's lawyer tried to discredit him, suggesting that Solomon was just saying what Margaret had told him to say. "No one tells me what to say," Solomon responded firmly. "I spent my life being told what to do, where to go, how to act. Freedom means I get to speak my own truth. And my truth is that Margaret Hayes is the most courageous, principled person I've ever known." The courtroom erupted in applause. Judge Morrison banged his gavel for order, but Margaret could see the calculation in his eyes. He'd expected an easy ruling in Robert's favor. Now he faced a courtroom full of people who sympathized with Solomon and Margaret. "I'll take this matter under advisement," Morrison said finally. "I'll issue a ruling within 30 days. The ruling came 28 days later. Judge Morrison, reading the political climate and knowing his career depended on it, ruled in Margaret's favor. Robert's case was dismissed with prejudice, meaning he could never bring it again. Margaret had won. Robert left Galveston the next day, bitter and defeated. Margaret never saw him again. Solomon stayed in Galveston for another week, meeting with the freed people Margaret's husband had helped, speaking at churches and community meetings about education and civil rights. On his last night in town, he and Margaret sat on the porch of her house, watching the sunset over the Gulf of Mexico. "I kept my promise," Solomon said. "I came back to Galveston. I found out what happened to some of the people I taught in Louisiana. And 3 of them made it north. They're free now, working and building lives. 2 others." He swallowed hard. "They didn't make it. Died on plantations in Mississippi. I'm sorry. Me too. But the ones who survived, they're teaching others now. Passing on the knowledge. It's spreading, Margaret. The idea that we deserve education, rights, freedom. It's spreading faster than the slaveholders can stop it. Good. That's how we win. Not all at once, but person by person, mind by mind. Solomon smiled. You sound like your husband. I'll take that as the highest compliment. They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Then Solomon said, I've been thinking about the future. About what comes next for both of us. What do you see? I see a war coming. Not tomorrow, not next year, but soon. The divisions in this country are too deep. Slavery will tear us apart. I know. My husband predicted the same thing. When it comes, I'm going to fight. Not with guns, but with words and ideas and education. I'm going to make sure that when slavery finally ends, freed people are ready to seize their rights and defend them. And I'll fight too, Margaret said. I'll keep exposing corruption, helping people, pushing for change. Until my last breath. Solomon took her hand. In a better world, we would have met as equals from the start. We would have been colleagues, friends, partners in building something good. We are all those things, Margaret said. Even in this imperfect world. Maybe especially in this imperfect world, because we had to fight so hard to make it true. Then let's keep fighting. You hear, me in Boston, both of us working toward that better world. Together, Margaret agreed. The next morning, Solomon boarded a ship back to Boston. But he carried with him the name Hayes, a symbol of the bond between two people who'd refused to accept the world as it was and had fought to make it better. Epilogue. Margaret Hayes lived another 30 years. She died in 1889, having spent her life fighting corruption, freeing slaves, and supporting education for freed people. Her estate funded schools across Texas that educated thousands of formerly enslaved children. Solomon Hayes became one of the most influential black educators in America. He founded 3 schools for freed slaves, wrote extensively about civil rights and education, and advised presidents on Reconstruction policy after the Civil War. He never forgot the woman who'd bought him at auction only to set him free. When the Civil War came in 1861, Solomon organized black regiments and taught former slaves to read so they could understand the freedom they were fighting for. He lived to see the 13th Amendment abolish slavery, the 14th Amendment grant citizenship to all born in America, and the 15th Amendment guarantee voting rights regardless of race. He died in 1901, surrounded by students and colleagues, having changed the world exactly as he'd promised. Years later, historians found Solomon's personal papers. Among them was a letter he'd written but never sent, addressed to Margaret Hayes. It read, "You asked me once what I would do with freedom. I've spent my life answering that question. I've taught thousands to read, helped hundreds escape slavery, and fought for rights that all humans deserve. But none of it would have been possible without you. You saw humanity in me when the world saw property. You risked everything for justice when others accepted injustice as normal. You were the first person who ever treated me like I mattered. I carry that gift with me every day. Thank you for showing me what one person, willing to stand up and fight, can accomplish. Thank you for being my teacher, my friend, my family. I hope I've made you proud." History remembers Solomon Hayes as a brilliant educator and civil rights pioneer. But Solomon himself knew the truth. He was a man who'd been bought at auction by a woman brave enough to see past the chains to the human being underneath. And together, they'd changed the world. Not through grand gestures or dramatic battles, but through small acts of courage repeated day after day. By refusing to kneel when the world demanded it. By standing up when standing up was dangerous. By believing that justice was worth fighting for, even when the fight seemed impossible. That's what heroes do. They find each other in the darkness. They stand together against injustice. And they never, ever give up.